Hello, and welcome to another episode of Live Mindfully. I am Laurie, and it's so great to have you here today. Today, I am discussing the fourth and final installment of the 4-part deeper dive into how to be more mindful in each and every day. Today's topic is an interesting one because if you can grasp it and do it effectively, it will actually change your whole life. It is set realistic expectations. Let's dive in. Okay, straight up, I want to say that the majority of our suffering comes from unrealistic expectations. The Bhagavad Gita, which is one of India's oldest texts, is considered to be a map and guidebook in managing our lives. The Bhagavad Gita is derived from the epic poem, the Mahabharata, which still stands as the longest poem ever written, with over 200,000 verses. And the Bhagavad Gita is perhaps one of the most important and highly revered yogic texts ever to have been written. One of the most important takeaways for me from the Bhagavad Gita is this: remove your attachment to the outcome and the results of your actions. If you practice this, you will live in freedom. So often we set these unrealistic expectations on things, and then we feel immense disappointment when things do not go to plan or we are not praised for our efforts. We often feel so depleted and upset, and then our good old mind jumps in to chastise us, and this makes us feel even worse. We feel embarrassed, stupid. We feel we've wasted our time and our energy, and worst of all, we feel like we've failed. And for some of us, this can not only ruin our day, but it will spill into the lives of the people we love, because we can't let it go. But it's interesting because we hear time and time again the stories of people who tremendously failed at something, or the outcome wasn't what they expected, and they fall into this deep heap. And then comes the learning. And then comes the triumph. Just like the hero's journey. And they always say the same thing: I didn't realize that I was being set up for something better. Sometimes we need to have faith. But I also think a safer space to operate from is either no attachment to the outcome, or setting yourself up at least for a number of possible outcomes. Because it is entirely possible that no matter how much effort you put in, no matter how much you try, that you still might fail. You know, what's that saying? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. As an example, I want to talk about this podcast. Every week, I sit down, I write out a script, and I record this podcast. And there is the potential that 6,000 people will listen. There's a chance that might happen. But there's also the potential that 600 people will listen. It's also just as likely that only 6 will listen. And I'm at this stage where I really want more people to listen. This is the 30th episode. I really want to get more people listening. On average, I get around 30 to 60 people each episode. Some have a little bit more, some have a little bit less. Now, to someone who doesn't have a podcast, that might seem amazing. because I don't have like a big following on Instagram. I don't have a massive marketing budget, but there's a little voice inside of me that says that's not enough people. Now, this podcast, I have to remember, is a new business venture. It's brand new, and I have already attached an outcome to each episode that over time is going to lead me to burnout. And there's the potential that I might start to hate this process because it isn't reaching my expectation, and my expectation might not be realistic. Now, it's okay for me to want to do well. It's okay for me to place hope in my dreams and my goals. But I am going to suffer if my focus is on the outcome and only on the outcome. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was actually by someone I recorded my very first podcast with, and I credit Claire with giving me that last final push to get my podcast up and running. And I'll include the podcast I did with Claire last year in the show notes. But in this podcast I was listening to yesterday called the Claire Wood Podcast, Claire was talking about the first time she launched a course and it didn't go to plan. For her, this was a failure. And she was so upset about the launch failing because she had done everything she thought she needed to do for this to be a success. She says she was so upset that she actually considered shutting her business down, that she was sobbing and fell in a heap. We've all been there. Maybe it's a conversation, a relationship, a job interview, a product launch, our marriage, a project, a marathon, our business, a degree. We've all been in that place where we worked really hard and we wanted it to be a success. And by all counts, it probably should have been, but it wasn't. And our expectation is where that disappointment comes from. And I truly understand that. But our ability to bounce back comes down to our mindset. And I'm not saying don't be upset. I'm not saying don't be disappointed. They are valid feelings and we need to accept that they exist within us. But don't set up camp and live there. Don't let that disappointment break you. Instead, pivot. Be sad, wipe those tears, and then shift your mindset to a space of curiosity. And for me, that might look like, that's weird that this podcast isn't growing as fast as I thought it would. I'm doing the Facebook and Instagram ads. I have my website up. I'm creating good content. There's a disconnect somewhere. And maybe finding that will help me move past this issue I'm having. But it might also be something that has nothing to do with me. It might be that podcast listening in general is down. It might be the ebb and flow of this industry. But shaming and blaming myself isn't helpful. Quitting when it's something you love isn't helpful. See if you can work out the disconnect, and if not, create your next steps. Don't waste time sitting in the lull. Instead, use that energy to investigate what your movements are going to be. What are you going to do now? And if that looks like quitting, that's fine. But make it from a clear mindset, not a muggy one. And this applies to other people as well. For me, I really struggle getting work done when my kids are at home and the school holidays are kicking off next week, and I have decided to take those 2 weeks off. The podcast will still come out, but I won't be teaching any of my regular classes. I'll slow my social media activity, and I'm taking a break because I'm setting realistic expectations. over this school holidays, I want to spend some real quality time with my kids. I love spending time with them, and I don't want to feel conflicted in doing that. I can't and shouldn't set an expectation for them to leave me alone for 6 hours a day while I work, unless I'm willing to bring in reinforcements, because that's unrealistic. And to be realistic, we need two things: the ability to set and hold boundaries. As an example, I've said I'm not going to work these next 2 weeks. I have to hold on to that. The second is recognizing what we can achieve in each day. Now, research tells us that we are only really able and capable of completing 3 big tasks each day. So I do not set more than that. Get clear on prioritization. Get comfortable saying no. Make a capture list and use that to create your to-do list. And then get into the habit of really using your calendar. Set up reminders, set up daily tasks, and stick to it as best you can. And if the day goes pear-shaped, as it often can, especially if you have kids, accept and correct. The old A&C. Accept that this has happened, and now decide what the next correct course is. Do you have deadlines and need to call in reinforcements? Can you take the day off? What are your next steps? Don't allow frustration and anger to overwhelm your system. That's a waste of your time and energy. Instead, use that time and energy to plan your next steps. One thing that I try to remember is that life is busy and stressful, and it's meant to be. But we need to know which are our glass balls, which are the ones we can't drop. And when life becomes too busy and too stressful, which are the rubber balls, the ones that if we drop them, they'll bounce and keep bouncing until we can pick them up again. Before we wrap up today, I do want to give a plug to a one-day retreat I have coming up. I'm running it with my dear friend Terry. It's July 30th, a Sunday, here in Brisbane. And if you are interested in coming along to a day of nourishing yoga, meditation, Reiki, and lots of space to just be with like-minded and connected people, please head over to my Facebook page, Live Mindfully with Laurie Moore, for more information. For all of the school parents out there, enjoy the week before the school holidays. I'll catch you again next week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please hit that subscribe button and share this episode with your family and friends and across your social media. Until then, take good care of yourself and thank you for listening. This is Live Mindfully with Laurie Moore.